A huge episode of Triggered tonight. We're going to have some fun. We got Darren Beatty from Revolver News. That's always a good one. You guys love his content. He's leading the charge on some of the forgotten stories that should be really, really big stories, but conveniently are being neglected by the mainstream media, the FBI, and other criminal organizations like that. I think all of you guys love Darren because every time he comes on, we get some incredible numbers and a ton of questions. So Darren is literally at the center of reporting some of the biggest stories. Again, January 6th pipe bomb mystery. It magically disappeared. You almost killed a vice president, and the RNC and the DNC, and yet no one's even curious what happened anymore. It's almost as though it was a plan. He's talking about and breaking stories on the aviation crisis in America, the DEI and insanity, as well as the endless war, corruption, and so much more. So you're going to want to watch this episode and check it out and hear what he has to say. You'll also get my first commentary on the insane ruling out of New York this week. My father, myself, my brother, the Trump organization, $364 million in what is described by many liberals even as a victimless crime. Even the libs, as crazy as many of them have gotten over the last few years, they are confused at this point. So we'll be talking about all of that. You'll get my reaction beyond what you just heard right now. So make sure you're liking, you're sharing, and you're subscribing. I see how many people are watching. I'm looking down here in the comments. Got a couple screens going. I see that. I see where we are. All you got to do is hit the like button. That's how we get it out there. Remember, you can find these episodes on Spotify and Apple Podcasts after they air here on Rumble. So if you have friends that get their podcast this way, make sure you're sharing this with them. It's easy. That's how we do it. You can also find more coverage of this show and all of the top stories that I'm interested in that we talk about here on my news app, MXM News, where you can get the mainstream news without the mainstream bias. These are the stories that me and my team see fit. We're one of the companies that has been debanked because people don't like being able to see an alternate viewpoint if you're in corporate America these days. So check out MXM News. You can get it on the App Store as well as on the Google Store and all of that stuff. And we're there for now, so that hopefully we can give you the news, not the Apple curated or Google curated news that is basically like the highlights from CNN. And as we always say, is that true, or did you see it on CNN? Because they're two very, very different concepts. So now last week, folks, it became official that America's justice system is no more. Judge Arthur Engoron's decision against my father, my brother, me, and the Trump organization is a complete travesty of justice. There's literally no victim here. Judge Engoron, who's a lifelong Democrat donor, literally wrote there, and I quote, timely and total repayment of loans. He said this. He said that happened. He said that it is undisputed that defendants made all required payments on time. Think about that. So he's acknowledging that there's no victim. Hey, folks, you can't have damages if there's no victim. You certainly can't have $364 million in damages if there's no victim. That's unheard of. That's insane. That's Bolshevik level stuff going on right here in America in 2024. Though if you've been watching for the last few years and watched our devolution, you'll see that that's probably not a stretch. And it's not just going to happen to Trump, folks. It's going to happen to you eventually. Here's Shark Tank host Kevin O'Leary explaining just how destructive all of this actually is.
For some reason, this judge takes it upon himself to fine this developer. Forget that it's Trump. This is not about Trump anymore. If you're a developer and you see this happen in the state of New York, why would you take the risk to put up this much money and have a judge arbitrarily decide that you are in some form of breach of fraud when no damages occurred at all? And this is the same process that occurs everywhere.
Guys, this case was brought for one reason and one reason only: to attack the Democrat Party's top political opponent, who happens to be my father. Democrat New York Governor Kathy Hochul just admitted this. She literally said the quiet part out loud. She went on the radio yesterday and said that other New York businessmen don't have to worry, folks, because they're very different than Donald Trump. I mean, think about that. This is a governor of a major state, one of the largest in the union, saying, no. Like, you're not going to get treated the same way as he is. You're not Donald Trump. So, you can do what real estate developers do, and we won't go after you. Are you sure? Or is it only we won't go after you if, say, you donate to Democrat attorney generals, or if you donate to Democrat gubernatorial candidates? Is that maybe the precedent that we're setting here? You know what? If we don't like your party affiliation, if you don't write a big enough check to our coffers when we run for office and we ultimately win in a one-party state, essentially like New York, we're going to go after you. I mean, think about it. They're saying it. They're saying anyone else who did exactly what Donald Trump, you have nothing to worry about because you're not Donald Trump. Sure. Until they want more money that they're going to spend senselessly like they do on so many of the other ridiculous problems and things in these blue states. That's the new law in New York, folks. As long as you don't run for president as a Republican and your last name isn't Trump, then New York won't try to use the courts to destroy you. ... Just yet, folks, because there's going to be a time where you have a little disagreement and they're going to put the full force and weight of the state against you, and they're going to try to ruin you and bankrupt you. This is the way the Democrat Party operates today. Make no mistake about it. The Attorney General, Letitia James, never hid that this is a political thing. She campaigned literally on the issue of suing and trying to ruin my father. Watch for herself.
Of this president are numbered.
Claims that you campaigned on a Get Trump agenda.
And we will rise up together and we will resist this president. Bring him down.
Remember, she's going to bring him down. That was before she ever saw anything, before she was ever in a position of power to do anything. That was what she raised millions of dollars on a campaign for. She then failed as a gubernatorial candidate because, in all fairness, not that good. But in New York, you don't have to be, especially if you have the judge on your side and you're doing the bidding of the Democrat Party. This ruling is so egregious, in fact, that it's being criticized by a prominent never-Trumper. A never-Trumper is even like, okay, this is maybe bad precedent, folks. Law professor Stephen Calabrese wrote in Reason magazine, and I quote, "The civil fraud judgment against Donald Trump is a travesty and an unjust political act rivaled only in American politics by the killing of former Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton by Vice President Aaron Burr." You remember that duel, okay? That's what this is, according to this very prominent lawyer who also happens to hate Trump. But luckily, even a few Democrats, even a few never-Trumpers can still understand what this means for our country, just how insane it actually is. If you're a New York resident, just know that your tax dollars are going towards helping Joe Biden's 2024 campaign. This is how Democrats use government. It's a tool. It's a tool to increase their political power. It's the reason why the border is completely open. Democrats see future voters and cheap labor for their donors. Nothing more, nothing less. It's a power grab. Biden's border resembles a United Nations meeting. Just take a look at this clip on the ground at the border.
That's okay, John. Listen, I want you to come with me for a second live here because I might as well be at a United Nations conference. We have migrants here from Turkey, from India, from Africa, from Peru, from China, a lot from China, as well as Brazil.
It never ends, folks. Biden is now threatening to release 6,000 illegal immigrants from detention if Republicans don't pass his open borders for America and secure borders for Ukraine legislation. That's what it is. Our borders remain wide open while we will mortgage our children's well-being, their lifestyle, their prosperity away to protect corrupt nations in Eastern Europe. Okay, that's their priority. it's very clear that D.C. prioritizes Ukraine over Americans. They think Americans are morons. Here's Politico from this morning, and I quote, 4 American senators recounted a story Ukrainian officials told them at the Munich Security Conference. A soldier in a muddy trench with Russian artillery exploded nearby, scrolling on his phone for signs the U.S. would approve military aid. I mean, that's a quote from a real Political magazine. Really? Really? He was, bombs blowing up, and he's scrolling Twitter. Maybe he's on Truth Social looking for some sort of relief from the American government. I mean, do they really expect us to believe that? That someone's scrolling Twitter while being bombarded by artillery, hoping just magically, someone strokes a pen and missiles just appear out of nowhere. While, again, our kids go into poverty, their future prosperity destroyed, so that we can fight a war that no one has yet articulated what victory looks like. That's kind of a big problem with all of this thing. We talk about that a lot on the show. Literally, no one has told us what victory looks like. No one has told us what the goals are, because we know the goals are just to spend more money, to enrich big war, the military-industrial complex. They don't get rich if they don't keep making missiles. They don't keep making missiles if we're not in endless wars. The vicious cycle continues. This is nothing new. The fake news is eager to play along with Biden's support for the former war. A CNN reporter said today that House Republicans now have blood on their hands. They have blood on their hands, guys, for not supporting Ukraine aid. Well, fortunately, good friend J.D. Vance, one of the few guys in the Senate actually out there fighting, was in Munich to explain that it's not pro-Putin to expect Europe to be able to defend itself. Watch and listen for yourself.
Heard what, Trump said, and, they've criticized it, and they said, well, Trump is going to abandon Europe. I don't think that's true at all. I think Trump is actually issuing a wake-up call to say that Europe has to take a bigger role in its own security. Germany, just this year, will spend more than 2% of GDP, okay? That, of course, is something that we had to really push for in the United States, and it just now has finally cleared that threshold. But it's not just about money spent. How many mechanized brigades could Germany field tomorrow? Maybe one, okay? The problem with Europe is that it doesn't provide enough of a deterrence on its own because it hasn't taken the initiative in its own security. I think that the American security blanket has allowed European security to atrophy. And again, the point is not we want to abandon Europe. The point is we need to focus as a country on East Asia, and we need our European allies to step up in Europe.
Another aspect of these things that's being overlooked is while we're sending billions and billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars worth of missiles to the Ukraine to protect their borders, what's happened to our stock? Are we actually able to defend ourselves right now? I imagine if you asked people like JD who could have this conversation honestly, the answer would be no. We've depleted our resources helping someone else protect their borders. Europe sits idly by because they're used to their big, dumb American allies coming in there and spending all their money, mortgaging their future. Remember the whole NATO push when my father was in there? Germany wants more money for protection against Russia while they wanted a pipeline from Russia to get cheaper gas for themselves. So they want America to protect them while they're enriching the enemy we're supposed to protect them from. Because our leaders are idiots. They're morons. They've done this, and they've continued to do it for years. It's why we're almost $35 trillion in debt. Okay? There is a point of no return. This isn't working anymore. Other people have to carry some of that weight. That's not being a Putin apologist. That's being a realist. And I wish we had a couple more realists in Washington, D.C. But as long as they're playing with your money and not their own, you're not going to see any of that. Well, finally, folks, more evidence emerged this weekend of Joe Biden's involvement in the Biden crime family's schemes. A Politico report on Sunday revealed that Joe Biden's name and clout was invoked by his brother, Jim Biden, during a deal with healthcare company AmeriCorps, which has since gone bankrupt. wreaking havoc in rural communities in the process. Joe Biden benefited from Jim's work with AmeriCorps, Politico noted. On the same day that Jim Biden received $200,000 payment for AmeriCorps, he made out a check for his brother Joe. I wonder. I mean, I know what we went through, where they created smoke and there was no fire, but no one's ever seen this much smoke surrounding one family without any fire, and yet still nothing happens. Will Joe Biden face any actual consequences for this? Of course not. There's one rule for Biden and one rule for the rest of the United States, and they're very different. So we need to wake up. We need to speak about this, okay? So that's why I ask you guys to like, share, subscribe, get this word out there so people are forced to have these conversations. Force them to be intellectually honest. They can't just hide behind the big tech/mainstream media headline, which is gaslighting and always far from the truth. So let's remember that and let's push back accordingly. And before we get to Darren, I got to get a quick word from our incredible sponsors, including one of our newest sponsors, Superbeat Heart Chews. We talk about it all the time, protecting not just your finances, but also protecting your health. And February is Heart Health Month, so it's a great time to start getting heart-healthy energy. Superbeats Chews are an easy, plant-based ways to support healthy blood pressure and circulation. Superbeats is the #1 doctor, pharmacist, and cardiologist recommended beet brand for cardiovascular health support. Paired with a healthy lifestyle, the antioxidants in Superbeats are clinically proven to be nearly 2 times more effective at promoting normal blood pressure than a healthy lifestyle alone. Get a free 30-day supply on all bundles and an extra 15% off your orders by going to getsuperbeats.com and using promo code TRIGGERED. That's GET Superbeats, BEETS.com, getsuperbeats.com. Use promo code TRIGGERED, get 15% off, and take care of yourself. Now, in the meantime, also be sure to check out The Wellness Company. We're protecting our health here. This is sort of a little bit different. This is not about maintenance. This is for when there's an outbreak, when there's a medical emergency. Like we saw with COVID, supply chain chaos, lockdowns, Fauci failures, all of it can make it harder to get the medicine you and your family need in a time of crisis. With the Wellness Company's medical emergency kit, you're empowered to take control of your health. The kit includes 8 life-saving medications, including amoxicillin, the Z-Pak, and ivermectin, for you to keep on hand at all times, along with a guidebook for safe and easy use. So from tick bites to COVID to extreme public health outbreaks, every scenario is covered. Avoid the high costs, the hospital wait times, and take control of you and your family's health needs. Go to twc.health/triggered for a 15% discount on the emergency medical kit. That's TWC, like the Wellness Company, twc.health/triggered. Get 15% off. Take care of yourself. And guys, with that, joining me now, Revolver News founder, Darren Beatty. Darren, what's happening, buddy? How are you?
Great to be back with you, Don.
Always good to have you, man. There's a lot going on. I'm looking forward for your take. So, first off, the left's lawfare is now at a place where it's clearly, just destroying our country. I mean, they're just laying siege, doing whatever they could possibly do. They scream of fascism, but they seem to be acting like fascists themselves. But, this end of days sort of stuff that you're reading about now, you're a political theorist. It's what you've done. You came from an academic background, very, esteemed at that. I've probably gotten a little bit of trouble being maybe the only Trump supporter back in 2015, 16 that was in academia. Probably changed career paths because of that one a little bit. But, as a political theorist, how do you describe the nature of the corruption we're seeing play out right now? Because, I mean, it really feels dystopian at this point.
Yeah, that's a great and very interesting question. It kind of eludes an easy and readily available answer. There's a temptation when one has read, the history of political theory and so forth to find some kind of convenient antecedent or heuristic with which to really account for what's going on. And, there's just the degradation of empires, which has something to do with it. And there are a variety of kind of convenient explanations that you see floating around the information ecosystem. But I think at the same time, there's something almost unique about the special version of dystopia that's emerged within the kind of postmodern West, and in particular in America. And I think a lot of the difficulty of capturing this really came about, crystallized around 2016 or so forth, because it really wasn't, the conservatives typically like to use terms like communist and socialist and everything to deride their ideological enemies. To some extent, there is applicability there, and to some extent not. And similarly, we like to use the term capitalist to describe what we are, and that isn't exactly the case either. And so we're this kind of weird dystopian creature that is a product of technological progress, but of a kind of degraded and decadent form, and various social ills. And so on a philosophical level, it's difficult to describe. On a political level, it's some sort of weird amalgam of the worst aspects of East Germany, Brazil, and South Africa. That's the best kind of description that I've been able to come up with so far. And it represents the blend of it's impossible to account for what's going on without the underlying effects of technological progress and how it's changed everything from the possibility of cancellation mobs to sort of deeper effects on the psychology, and various other cultural factors. So it's a very interesting question, and it's very difficult to answer. Probably would require a book to give a full account of it. But I think I'll stop at saying it's very tempting to go back and say, oh, it's like the collapse of the Roman Empire, or pluck some kind of antecedent, because what's the point of all of that learning if you can't draw some kind of comparison?
Yeah.
But I tend to emphasize the uniqueness of the special kind of dystopia that has emerged. And of course, there are other things, just like third world incompetence, that you see that are not particularly new, but it's third world incompetence within a very different sort of context, and that's what gives its unique flavor.
Yeah, no, I mean it is unique. The tech component, I guess you're right, is something that's added a various element to this. I had an interesting conversation a couple years ago with Palmer Luckey, who founded Oculus. He was the youngest guy on the board of Facebook. He made a couple $1 billion by the time he was like 19, and they kicked him off Facebook's board because he happened to be a conservative. And he was saying, at any other time, he was really in reference to China. He was talking about AI, and this is a few years ago, before most people even were really thinking about AI on their radar. And he was like, at any other time in history, you could have an uprising because you could get enough of a critical mass of people together to push back on something. But now with AI and the way that technology works, the second there's one dissident, they can find him, they can isolate him, they pull him from the herd, you're never heard from again. It prevents sort of some of the natural things. So I think you're right. I mean, the technological aspect of what they've been able to do, the way they've been able to sort of push their hand on the scale. It's what Google does on a daily basis. It's what Facebook and Meta do on a daily basis. Even if you think you're able to look at something objectively, maybe some people are. They don't even realize just how influenced they're being by the tech side of things. What have you seen from that perspective?
Well, yes, it certainly allows for more capable and efficient mechanisms of control. It allows for more subtle mechanisms of control. And that's another, I think, interesting dimension of the conversation is different types of authoritarian systems are appropriate for different types of people. I think, for instance, China, which is a competing authoritarian system, I consider our system also authoritarian, but of a very different variety. Different things are taboo, for instance, in China versus the United States. There are things that you couldn't say in the United States without getting fired or professionally ruined that you could scream out on the streets in Shanghai with no repercussions whatsoever.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, like there's only two
conversely,
genders.
There are things. There are
they're
things
fine
that,
with that one in China.
exactly, and there's things that you can say in the United States that you probably couldn't get away with saying in China. So it's just different things are taboo, but on a deeper level, there's different types of authoritarianism that kind of comport with different national characters. I think in China, there's an implicit social contract that they're willing to give up certain freedoms that are not really in their history or in their kind of cultural expectation, and in exchange for economic progress and various other metrics of development and advancement. And so long as they're advancing as a society, so long as things are moving in a more orderly direction from chaos to orderliness, clean streets, functional infrastructure, growing economy, and these kinds of things, they could say, okay, we can accept an authoritarian system in exchange for that. Now, the funny thing about our dystopia is we're kind of getting the worst of all worlds, because we're sacrificing our freedoms and we don't even get clean and functional cities out of it, which is kind of, what's the point? At that, even Pyongyang, as I say, has clean streets. But for us, I think we require more subtlety in propaganda. We have to think of ourselves as living in a free society, and therefore the propaganda has to function differently. It has to be far more subtle and far more sophisticated, I think, in the United States. And you have to convince people, like you have, a group of thousands of people, all with tattoos and weird like piercings and things, and they all think that they're expressing their unique different characters. That's always captured for me the mechanism of Western and specifically American propaganda. You have to somehow convince a bunch of conformists who are really doing what the regime wants, but they have to think of themselves as challenging the regime or expressing individuality or freedom or something.
Yeah.
And you see it all the time on the left with these, left aligned cultural figures who genuinely think of themselves as attacking, big, powerful structures, when all that they're doing is acting in lockstep conformity with the political ideals of every single powerful institution in the country. But
yeah, kids, you're not the resistance. If you
Exactly.
agree with all of corporate America, all of big pharma, all of the mainstream media, all of pop culture, like, I got news for you. You ain't the resistance, buddy.
Exactly.
You're the pawn.
Exactly. So, and that's, we particularly associate with that with the left, but I think there's a generalization you can make there, is that Americans still, and that's why this whole thing about the pretense of being in a free society is such a crucial part of our self-understanding, and why I think what's happened since 2016, since the emergence of the Trump phenomena and the regime just going crazy in opposition to it, there's been a certain sense in which the pretense of our being a free society has been abandoned and sacrificed. And that has, I think, very interesting downstream consequences in terms of our self-understanding and also the ability of the regime to maintain its effectiveness down the line. I think that we're in different territory when we've abandoned even the pretense of being a free society. And you mentioned, sort of the algorithms and their effect on things. That, I think, is also very conveniently tailored to our kind of specific requirements, because it allows a mechanism of profound control, but also very subtle control. Because people, it's one thing if you have Big Brother telling you, no, you can't do this. It's another thing when Big Brother says, okay, this is going to be in the top 10 search result when you search this. And maybe the more, politically dangerous stuff, we're going to put that in the 50th position, which we know based on psychological research, no one will ever go to the, 50th page Google search result. You'll just go to the first page. And so many things like that due to, how lazy people have become and how susceptible people have become to what the technologists call friction, which is basically any effort that you have to put in to get somewhere. People's laziness in this regard has actually been exacerbated by technology itself, because everything is so convenient and immediately accessible. Just to have to jump through a couple hoops is you might as well have something completely censored, but you don't have to do it. You just have to have people jump through hoops. So,
you don't have to actually learn something. You can just, Wikipedia it and get literally the most biased possible explanation for something. Just find any conservative and read their Wikipedia page versus what you know about them, and you realize, like, wait a minute, we're being influenced across the board, and that's what Google uses as their fact check system. And it's one big methodology helping the leftist viewpoint on all of these things. But you're right, if you're lazy and you're not going to do the research, which we're all frankly guilty of in many cases, especially for things that we may not deem all that important, we are being influenced whether we like it or not. We assume the light version of something or the audited version of something is actually reality when it's oftentimes far from it.
Exactly. Yes. So there's like two different basic dimensions of the effect of technology. One is it allows the system to more effectively exercise control, and the other side is sort of more insidious and internal to the psychology, is that it really changes the way that people process information, and it kind of rewires your brain. Simply being accustomed to process information on the internet rewires your brain and has a negative effect on one's attention span. I can say it for myself. I made a living, that was my job, reading every day and writing, and I used to read hours and hours and hours a day. Now that I've been in the news, I can barely read for 20 minutes an actual book because the internet has rewired my circuitry. And I'm probably not even the worst example. So there's
I get it, man. Once social media kicked in and I had my phone and I had all of that, you had to stay relevant. Now, I guess I've turned it into a platform, but I see people that spend 8-9 hours a day on their phone, and they got 7 followers. I'm like, what are you doing?
Right.
But you're right. I mean, I used to probably read a book a week, every other week. Now if I read 2 or 3 a year, it would probably be a lot, and I considered myself fairly well read. But in the last 5, 6, 7, maybe even 8 years, that's totally been gone by the wayside. And I was actually reasonably disciplined about that. People who weren't, I imagine, they're not even picking these things up anymore. And I run a publishing company too, so it's like that's how crazy it all is.
No, absolutely. And we're just getting started, with the new, I guess it's somewhat inevitable that we're going to have these glass things everyone's wearing, or it's at least very likely that some version of that will. And then your entire, perceptive apparatus is quite literally mediated completely. Everything is mediated to the point where you're not even, getting a direct sort of visual perception of things. The cameras in what you're wearing is processing something and then it passes back to you. So everything is, and the opportunity to abuse that are obvious, but forgetting about that, simply saying, well, how does that just degrade your perceptual apparatus? How does that change sort of the nature of what you are as a human being in terms of how you live in the world and exist in the world? And so we're really kind of becoming different creatures. And I don't say this from a kind of Luddite perspective. I don't really think it's possible to go back, but I think even as we inexorably move forward, it's better to do so with the maximum degree of self-awareness as to what's happening and what we're losing.
Well, I hope we have that. I mean, you saw it, sort of, what was it, 10 days ago at the World Economic Forum. They're basically like, hey, listen, the rich will be able to go vacation in places, and for everyone else, here are your VR goggles. And I'm saying, wait a second, but when you think about it, you think about the advent of AI, and I remember when AI first came out, and some of these. And stuff was going on, and then you canceled the pipeline coming through America, and all the reporters are out there, those guys, the roughnecks that work on the pipelines, like they should just learn to code. Well, it turns out, AI is probably displacing reporters in a lot of these basic white-collar jobs. Basic, white-collar legal is going to be taken out by AI because you can stick something in a computer and you don't have to pay someone $500 an hour, for basic thing. As that develops, it almost feels as though there's going to be a lot of people that are incapable or unwilling to work sort of, good blue-collar manual labor jobs that are going to be totally displaced in the workforce. And maybe something else comes up that puts them out. But, it almost feels like, hey, we'll put you on a government program. The VR goggles will keep you busy, and that's going to be your life. And honestly, when you look at sort of again the devolution of where we've gone as a society, and guys like you who are academics that don't read much anymore because you can't. You got to wonder what the long-term plan is for all of these things.
Yeah, it is very strange, and I'm told there was a Harvard sort of libertarian philosopher called Robert Nozick, and he was known for a thought experiment with basically, say, well, if you could experience all of these things in a kind of pleasure machine and it was indistinguishable from reality, like, would you do it? And it's designed to tease out, the significance of things actually happening versus you just experiencing them as happening. And I'm told that for the first time ever, when presented with this sort of thought experiment, the students were basically attracted to the idea of living in this experience machine. And so, again, I think this accounts for a transformation of our collective relationship to technology and to what is real. We're increasingly accepting that our lives and our perception and our experiences will be hyper-mediated through technology rather than mediated through our normal biological apparatus. And again, so it's the technology transforms our preferences in that regard, and as we become more accustomed to it, it just becomes, it really does kind of shape who we are as creatures to the level that we're kind of evolving beyond, but maybe not even in a positive way, evolving beyond, human beings in the sense that we would ordinarily understand that term.
Yeah, we're going into the Matrix, right? And but I guess since you mentioned Robert Nozick, are we better off under his sort of night watchman state and divorced from this micromanagement of all of our lives, because it breeds sort of a police state and tactics and lawfare that we're seeing play out right now? I mean, you saw Governor Hochul of New York. No, this it's different. It's this isn't going to happen to everyone else that is a developer in New York. It's only happening to Trump. I mean, are we to believe all that?
Well, I mean, I don't think it's only going to happen to Trump. The political system has been politically weaponized in the same way that sort of the security system was weaponized. I think the first wave of it, as you saw, and that's been a running theme, really, since, again, all of this stuff really kicked off with the Trump phenomenon that just shocked the system and terrified the establishment. To the point that the entire security apparatus that was, really developed to address the war on terror, which obviously had its own issues. Part of the reason that Trump so scared the establishment was that he was willing to critique that war on terror. But nonetheless, this whole system that was set up, like the Department of Homeland Security, which is the spearhead for this whole thing, has all been repurposed politically in order to silence and suppress the energies associated with 2016. And now we see a new wave of that's happening concurrently with the national security wave, which is the real weaponization of the legal system. And again, this is, in a certain way, this is, third world. But it exists within a context that it's not just, the third world context actually has advantages that we don't have. It's like the worst of all worlds.
Yeah, when you don't have Wi-Fi, it's hard to be manipulated by big tech.
Right, exactly.
We're going to go down the rabbit hole much faster than they will, unfortunately. But
exactly. So it's very dangerous. It's unprecedented. It's related to what I was saying earlier about abandoning even the pretense of living in a free society, notwithstanding the public justifications. Oh, we have to completely abandon the rule of law in the name of democracy. But that's just less and less believable. And,
that's sort of an interesting point, right? Because you brought up cancel culture before, and it's sort of interesting. I mean, I feel like it still very much exists for certain things. But, I notice, there's words that were part of, what would be, our vernacular when we were children. People, you see them now. You're on social media, and people are saying, retarded again when something is that would otherwise be ridiculous. And they're using that. There was a period of time that was literally a cancelable offense. They're using the word gay, not in the sense of sexuality, but just like, I don't know, that shirt was gay when you were in high school. You said that. It was every other word out of your vernacular. It got so bad. The thought police were out there in such full force and effect. And yet now I'm seeing some of that sort of make a comeback. People are becoming slightly less afraid. They're sort of saying, the cancel culture went so far, people are saying, fuck it, it's not worth it. At this point, just cancel me, because you can't have a basic conversation. Do you think the notion of cancel culture, while it's still very much controlled by the left, has sort of maybe jumped the shark a little bit, where it's not quite the threat that it was 2 years ago?
That's a very interesting question. This is something, I was a target of cancel culture at one time myself, and I've thought about this a lot. And I think, yes, it's a yes and no. It's certainly the case that attempts at cancellation for public conservative and right-wing figures are far less successful and far less severe than they were even, say, 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah,
that is certainly the case. I think that part of that is just how the latest developments on Twitter with Elon, that plays a part of it. But more so, it's just that it's almost a consequence of hyperpolarization. The early stages of political polarization, there was still some sense where the right wanted to. The right was guilty of canceling its own, much more so than the left actually canceling the right.
That's true.
And so I think and that was a consequence of there being this sort of there was a bridge there between more of the right and the left, whereas the left getting so crazy and things polarizing to such a hyper degree, I think that fracture accounts for a dynamic whereby basically everybody on the right, and we're accepting, there's still an establishment on the right. It's just not within the information ecosystem that would be an instrument of cancellation. Mitch McConnell is probably not going to have you for dinner. He's not going to support your campaign or so forth, but it's not like you're going to be canceled in that same sense that we associate with the term. So I think the polarization has made a big difference there in terms of the consequences of cancellation. But the other side to that, though, is I think that it's much more difficult for words to have an impact as such. So before, when words had more of an impact, or there was a perception of that, there were more repercussions to words that could have a politically subversive effect. Whereas I think now the information ecosystem is, on the one hand, so polarized, and on the other hand, just so kind of chaotic and rapid in terms of its movement, that it's very hard for anything to just land and stick in an impactful way. And so on the one hand, you have people who aren't getting canceled so harshly. On the other hand, I think it's much more difficult now than it was before for words to have an impact at all within the public arena.
I mean, that's fair and also scary, but I can totally see that. I mean, with other stuff going on right now, you brought up Mitch McConnell. Where do you see this Ukraine funding battle going? Are the Democrats and the media just going to blame Republicans for successes that Russia make? And, I don't think anyone's pretending that, despite what they're doing for but that Russia's not winning this thing right now. And, maybe if we spend another couple $1 trillion, maybe we can give Ukraine a chance. And, but, what are your thoughts there? It feels like we're living in backwards world as it relates to all of this right now. And no one's actually articulated sort of how this will end or what even success looks like.
That's a great question. And, I have to second your commendation of Senator Vance. I think Vance is really outdone himself in the Senate. And we're so accustomed to seeing disappointments in office. And I think Vance has really outdone himself, and particularly on this issue, taking the lead here. But it is kind of bizarre, and I think you hit the nail on the head in your monologue, which is, where's all of this going? What are our end term conditions? What are our objectives other than Raytheon executives getting a bonus and buying another house in Telluride?
I mean, who needs objectives? It's just war. Just keep killing, right? Like, it's insane to me. Like, and no one's asking these questions. Like, well, so what does it look like? When does it stop? What is victory? Is it just going to be another $60 billion next month and another on top of that? I mean, eventually we run out of money, right? Like, what happens to our own stockpiles of weapons? If I know it seems that this administration certainly has made it clear they could care less about our sovereignty, our borders, but maybe another administration down the line wants to actually protect our country from our enemies, since this one clearly doesn't.
It's just so puzzling, and really, when you think about it, it's so frustrating. You think about how much money was wasted in the war on terror, trillions and trillions of dollars. How much money was wasted on the COVID scam fiasco? Yeah. Probably, in the trillions, somewhere near there, if we do a full and honest accounting. And now, how many hundreds of billions dumped into this Ukraine thing that doesn't have any clear objectives? Think of what we could actually do if all of that money were directed just marginally more intelligently, not even like brilliantly, just marginally with more rationality than that. The waste is unfathomable. I always start with the thought experiment. You get these people who are putting these billions and billions of dollars into Ukraine without even reading these bills. Especially recently, they haven't had time to read any of this.
It's 7,000 pages, and we're voting on it in 15 minutes. Congratulations. Exactly. Do your research.
And most of these people are half literate anyway, and for that reason, for that matter, they're mostly innumerate. I would love to just call these people on the spot in the Senate, and how many of them even know how many zeros there are in a billion?
Yeah. No,
just put them on the spot. Say, how many zeros are there in a billion? You say we want 100 billion, to Ukraine, whatever. It's not, and part of it's Ukraine, and then there's stuff for Taiwan, and like everybody gets something except for the border. That's what just makes it so egregious. And the fact that the Democrats are so committed to the Ukraine funding, but you almost have to admire just how rock solid they're. They're like, we're so committed to the Ukraine stuff, but we're also not going to give you anything for the border. They're like, and they can get away with it. Usually they get away with it. It's incredible. And that, by the way, that's another component. That's another unique component of this dystopia and this authoritarian system. Think of this thought experiments, like your Mao, who is responsible for millions and millions of deaths. If somebody went to Mao, back in the day, and said, Mao, I have an idea. Let's open up the borders of China. Let's allow massive immigration from everywhere in the world, but mostly the third world, mostly the least accomplished and most corrupt places on the planet. Let's give them a massive preference. And let's just let them flood in massive numbers for decade after decade after decade until our entire Chinese population is replaced. And in order to allow this to happen, let's ruin the lives of anyone who points out what we're doing or criticizing. I guarantee you, Mao would probably look in that person's eyes and say, how crazy and depraved are you?
Mao would draw a line at today's Democrat Party policies. He'd agree with most of them.
Civilized stuff of starving our citizens to death, but replacing our citizens forever with foreigners, that's a bridge too far.
You are going too far, sir. Mao would say. It's amazing. But I mean, But you're right. I mean, it is insane. I mean, you've been at the center of, a lot of the January 6th investigations, but mostly, the pipe bomb mystery that you would think that Democrats would have a real problem with, right? I mean, they threatened the DNC, the vice president-elect, the RNC. I mean, I don't think they care too much about Republicans or other Americans, but you'd think they'd have something to say about it. But, by now, many people have seen your reporting from Revolver News talking about the footage of Secret Service acting very calmly, letting kids walk near the supposed pipe bomb that they discovered on January 6th. Can you take us through, what's new? Because it feels like it's always evolving, but it also feels like the kind of thing that, the second it gets out there, sort of like the magical shooting that happened at the Kansas City, football Super Bowl parade. It's out of the news really quickly. You got to wonder why.
Well, it's very interesting. I think, unfortunately for the regime, they've been in suppression mode for so long on this particular story, and they've moved to damage control because with the latest video release, the story has reached escape velocity, and we're in the very final stages of ending this for good with the smoking gun, the final smoking gun. This pipe bomb story is probably, the biggest political scandal in recent American history because it really does underscore and demonstrate that January 6th as such was what I've called it all along, a Fedsurrection. Yeah. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like we have time to get into the full thing, so I'll just give people the most salient and immediate details with respect to this new footage. So the new footage that was released courtesy of Thomas Massey's persistent efforts, he's taken up our reporting and helped push it to the next level, which I'm very grateful for. We have this footage of the discovery of the pipe bomb outside of the DNC. Now, the footage depicts someone that we now know to be a plainclothes Capitol Police officer going up to Secret Service detail, informing them of the presence of this explosive device within feet of them. And the remarkable thing about the video was how lackadaisical the response was, the utter lack of concern. The Secret Service agents spend over a minute before they bother getting out of their vehicle, whereupon they just stand around, linger around for another 2 minutes. The most flagrant aspect of the video is when the Secret Service agents allow a group of children to cross the street in the direction of the bomb and walk within feet of a bomb. So there's a part of the video where you have the agents standing around the bomb, you have children who are just allowed to walk within feet of the bomb, no concern whatsoever. And of course, the Secret Service agents were protecting Kamala Harris, who was in the DNC building at the time. So you have these agents who are utterly concerned for their own safety, utterly unconcerned for Kamala Harris's safety, and utterly unconcerned for the children's safety. It's clear that they knew that the bomb was fake.
Yeah.
The only question is, how would they have known that this bomb was fake? And
it almost feels like enough people clearly knew about what was going on, that there was some sort of setup. I mean, when does the whole sort of, the cover up sort of disappear? When does someone finally talk? Because it feels like there's dozens of people made aware, right? This wasn't just something done covertly by the CIA. Like others had to know because no one responds this way.
We're in the very final stages of this. There are two more points. So I mentioned that Kamala Harris was in the building. This is something that she actively covered up and only leaked nearly a year after January 6th. And she still has not publicly acknowledged her presence in the building. Now think about this, Don. Kamala Harris is probably one of the most politically opportunistic creatures on the planet. Why would she forego the opportunity to milk politically the fact that she came within a hair's width of losing her life to this MAGA pipe bomb? Why would Joe Biden, who is like ruled to be, legally senescent? It's like, those old Supreme Court cases where they ruled, to use one of these cancelable words, if you're retarded, you can't be subject to capital punishment because your mind is not capable of like processing right and wrong.
Yeah.
Basically, Joe Biden was given the equivalent ruling in the Herm memo. It's like,
And if you've seen Joe Biden, it's like, it's hard because it's like you want to cancel him for it, but you're like, yeah, but I kind of agree. Like he clearly is adult. I don't know how he can have the nuclear football, but like minor details.
Right.
It's, you can't really have it both ways, but they've certainly made an art form of having it both ways on the left.
Exactly. And so Joe Biden, who is clearly senile, and it's an effort for him to give a speech that's longer than 5 minutes. He gave a speech for over an hour to emphasize how important January 6th was on the third anniversary of January 6th. And remember, January 6th is not even, it's the pretext for the weaponization of the national security state, but more immediately, it's the legal pretext of all these sham efforts to remove Trump from the ballots. So January 6th is still a very live issue for the left. And Biden, accordingly, gave over an hour-long speech about January 6th, about how ominous it was as this, horrible act of domestic terror. And yet the most domestic terror-like thing that happened on January 6th were these explosive devices. The government technically considers pipe bombs to be weapons of mass destruction. And yet in this entire hour-long speech that senescent, senile Joe Biden gave, he couldn't dedicate a single line to telling the public, oh, by the way, my own vice president almost lost her life to these pipe bombs. So you think, how dark and how dirty and how embarrassing does the truth have to be for these people who won't shut up about how dangerous January 6th was, to not mention the fact that Kamala Harris was in the building 100%. When the bomb was there and being discovered?
Yeah, listen, Kimberly worked, with her when she was a prosecutor and stuff like that in the office. And I don't think Kamala Harris ever tried anything, but she was, one of the most ambitious bureaucrats in the world, sort of incompetent at anything other than being a bureaucrat. There's literally zero chance that she wouldn't jump at this opportunity. She jumped at plenty of other opportunities, it seems, that are far, let's just say, indiscretionate, things that we would not talk about on this show, that she seemed very happy doing to move herself forward in her career and advance her prospects. I have a feeling that if she was legitimately going to get blown up by, a MAGA extremist, she'd be all over it all day. Every day since January 6th, 2020, and almost not a peep. It's literally, it can only mean one thing.
That would be the main talking point of January 6th. And with this latest video where it's clear that her Secret Service detail knows the bomb is fake and there's no innocent explanation for why they would know the bomb is fake, that certainly adds to the suspicion. And one more quick thing on this, because this is a whole saga. We've created this whole universe of reporting at Revolver for the past 3 years on this pipe bomb, and now we're finally at the final stages. But to just give people a sense of how infinitesimally implausible the official version of things really is. So these pipe bombs were planted the evening before. The DNC bomb was planted around 8 p.m., and the RNC bomb was planted around 8:30. Now, these two bombs, we're told, they're sitting out there in their respective locations, undiscovered, for 16, 17 hours. And then magically, 3 minutes before the Rayette's West Perimeter breach on the Capitol, a random pedestrian discovers the RNC bomb behind a trash can. And then 15 minutes later, the DNC bomb is randomly discovered when it was sitting out there for 17 hours undiscovered. So the pipe bomb scenario is they're planted the evening before, and they both are sitting there undiscovered between 16 and 17 hours, only to each be independently, coincidentally discovered within a 15-minute time frame that perfectly coincides with the West Perimeter attack on the Capitol.
Yeah, seems legit. I don't know how to fake the world's largest eye roll, but I'm glad you guys are all over it because hopefully someone finally comes forward. I doubt it, or they'll whack them or whatever it may be. But there's no question that this was like the rest of January 6th, just totally a setup, and it's part of the Fed's direction. If they didn't get what they wanted at Congress, this was the backup plan as the proverbial threat to democracy. Yada 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 yada. It's all a soundbite to them. But hey, they got what they wanted, so all of a sudden this can disappear. And if this isn't the focal point, then the very glaring holes in the story no longer get to be scrutinized the same way.
Absolutely. And look, there's so much at stake in it, and it's not like they've abandoned it. They still think January 6th is useful because they're using it to remove Trump from ballots.
Yeah.
They're still using January 6th, and as evidence of that, Joe Biden gave a major speech on the 3rd anniversary. And so I say this is only to encourage more people in the GOP, more elected officials in the GOP. We're at the stage of the investigation now where it's safe to jump on board. And it's absolutely worthwhile because the fake narrative that the regime has invested in January 6th is used to demonize and falsely incriminate everybody. It's not even just Trump supporters. It's basically anybody who deviates from the regime, including all Republicans, whether they like it or not. So it's one of the highest leverage, best uses of people's time, energy, and resources now that we're so close to the finish line on this, to just help us get to that extra step because we're so close. And I know for a fact the regime is panicking, the regime media is panicking. They're coming up with damage control plans because with this latest video, it's over. People look at that and they say, how in the world does the Secret Service, which by the way, they swept that area twice with dogs. Did both dogs have COVID that day and they couldn't smell the gunpowder?
Yeah, just so we're clear, like I went to the Secret Service, training facilities. Like I got in the bite suit. I had to call my father to get permission to do it because I was like, I want to see what these dogs can do. Needless to say, it was an eye-opening experience. I used to be the guy who was like, oh yeah, I could punch a dog off, like zero chance. But I also got to watch them work the bomb-sniffing dogs. And, like I said, many of these guys are my friends. I'm sure the leadership there probably doesn't love me, but, the door kickers and the agents, I think I was told I was the most requested detail in the Secret Service. I treat people well. I do cool shit. It was sort of good. So I got to do all this stuff. I've seen those dogs work. It's some of the most, and I come from a hunting background with field trial labs and all that kind of stuff. Like I understand good. I've never seen anything like it. It was so impressive. They didn't miss anything. And I don't mean miss a pipe bomb. I miss a little, smudge of something from a pipe bomb under a box hidden in an airtight compartment. They were on it. There's no way they sweep this thing currently housing the vice president-elect, for 17 hours and everyone misses it. There's literally zero. There is less than zero chance. I'd bet my life on it.
The amazing thing, Don, there are 2 different dogs that are recorded on videos having swept the area, which makes you think, were they lying about the pipe bomb actually being there when they said it was? And it just so happens that in another piece of research we did a while back, we showed that the FBI is withholding video footage that would definitively show whether or not the person planted the bomb when they said they would.
Well, they slowed down the footage, so the stuff that you see is like, 1960s video technology magically. I mean, I'm sure that was the technology outside of Congress and outside of the DNC and the RNC. Just, totally not a setup. In other major news that you guys are reporting on, it surrounds the stuff going on in, the aviation safety crisis and how sort of DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, is a threat to air traffic control, to pilot hiring, and to much more. You've been at the center of it, and the story just seems to keep getting bigger. It's sort of like, as you go sort of further down the rabbit hole, you realize just, honestly, at this point, just how much they're literally playing with our lives. Can you give us the latest on what's happening with all of that?
Well, it's interesting that this theme has seemed to have taken off, no pun intended, since our major report on the FAA. And we're seeing more and more examples of near misses. We've seen a lot of problems specifically with the Boeing 737 MAX, which is very dangerous. Nikki Haley's old company, the legacy of Nikki Haley at Boeing. And we're seeing pilot errors. We're seeing more near misses. And again, it's just reinforcing this underlying collapse in confidence that we're seeing across the infrastructure spectrum in the United States. And, the technologists at the cutting edge like, to talk about the decline in innovation, but this is sort of an even more troubling decline in our ability to simply maintain complex infrastructure that's been around for a long time. And there are, in our study, we found two major culprits to this. One was aggressive DEI promotion, specifically in the air traffic controller profession. And the other was the downstream ramifications of COVID policy. Again, like I said, how much did COVID cost us? One of our early groundbreaking pieces was a cost-benefit analysis of the lockdowns, but that was a more narrowly targeted analysis. We didn't even incorporate downstream effects like what happens when there's a next major aviation disaster that results from the hiring freeze that they implemented during COVID. And that's another major factor affecting the air traffic control. And there are countervailing trends. That's the interesting thing about when you're saying that, the special blend dystopia that we have, because the incompetence and DEI are really nothing unique to the US. There's, third world incompetence all across the third world, but it's combined with this technological advancement to the point that, I think the system is banking on automated systems sort of accelerating more rapidly than we're being held back by DEI. So basically counting on technological progress to outpace, the degradations of affirmative action.
Don't worry, guys. Someone that's totally unqualified to fly the plane, they're just sort of a placeholder at this point. It's going to be robotic. Don't worry. We're going to pay them a salary. Just hope they don't actually have to ever take over, because then you're screwed.
Just sit there. Sit there and look good on the brochure, basically. But yeah, that's the big question, is whether, the technologists are right that basically technological progress will totally overwhelm and accelerate beyond the increasing degradation of infrastructure we see on account of DEI and other policies.
Interesting. So one of the stories that seems to be just totally swept under the rug is no one's getting paying any attention to it, is the stuff that you guys are covering as it relates to Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan. I know a lot of people don't know about it, but he was actually prosecuted and thrown in jail and then won an election. I mean, it feels like maybe Pakistan is foreshadowing some of what the Democrats are trying to do here in America, and maybe that's what the result is. But why is this not getting any coverage? What's the latest? It seems sort of interesting. I mean, didn't their parliament basically say, no, he was thrown in jail falsely, it was a sham, and he wins an election, it doesn't actually matter? And why don't more people have a problem with that here in America, other than maybe whoever's doing it to him in Pakistan, that's the playbook they're looking to run here in 2024.
Absolutely. It is curious, the lack of attention, especially when comparatively you can see how much attention has been given, I think with, justification to the sad fate of Navalny in Russia. Well, here we have a figure who is probably the better comparison is not Navalny, but Trump. I would call him basically the Pakistani Trump, and the parallels are striking. He was a kind of a superstar playboy in the 80s, a major worldwide cricket star, a big sensation in the media, and he left the life of glamour for a life in politics, where he successfully challenged the two entrenched political parties and family political dynasties to win the election in the first place. Does that sound familiar? Trump defeating the Clinton dynasty and the Bush dynasty?
Sounds
there
fairly
was
familiar.
The equivalence in Pakistan of the Sharif and Bhuttos, and Khan defeated them. And he was a major populist figure. He was a critic of the deep state. And really, if there's any country in which the term deep state applies, it's Pakistan, that is infamously controlled by its intelligence services and the military going back a very long ways. Khan was the first person to exist kind of independently of them, and there's always been a kind of interesting, tense relationship. that I think frayed as his tenure moved on. And then, for all these people talking about meddling, well, maybe the most flagrant version of election meddling ever took place under the Biden administration, in which Biden's State Department officials basically told Pakistani government officials, you need to get rid of Khan in a no confidence vote and things will be much better for you. And then sure enough, the very next day after this diplomatic cable was sent, the so-called cipher, Khan was subject to a no confidence vote and ultimately removed. But because he was such a popular figure, by far, the most popular person in Pakistan, one of the most popular political leaders in the world. Pakistan is the fourth most populous nation on earth, I believe. Yeah. And same story that we see, and he might have even had it worse than Trump in a way. He was subject to 150 bogus criminal charges, from classified documents cases to just phony, just complete phony stuff. His party was basically deemed illegal, so they couldn't run as his party. So the people running aligned with his party ran as independents. They charged him with a classified document case for saying that there was a diplomatic cable from the US government demanding his ouster. The Intercept leaked that cable, and turns out that was true, but Khan didn't even reveal the contents of it. And yet, just like a couple weeks before the election, he was already in prison, but they gave him a 10-year sentence. And despite all of this, despite making his party illegal, despite having him in prison, despite hitting him with a 10-year sentence right before the election, his party basically won the election. I mean,
maybe it's why they're working so hard to make sure my father's not on the ballot, so that the obvious corrupt, the Democrats here have taken it a step further to try to prevent what happened in Pakistan from happening here, where you're right, you're unlawfully imprisoned, you're this, that, the other, but you're still on the ballot, so you can win. They got to pull him off the ballot is the last step that was missing.
Exactly. And the amazing thing is, when he won, again, the other guy, the corrupt guy, went out and gave a victory speech, even though he'd got fewer votes. His party got fewer votes. But Khan, from prison, gave his own victory speech as an AI.
Wow.
How crazy is that? So it's actually a really wild story. The parallels are striking. It's portentous. It's a fascinating saga in its own right. And of course, in this parliamentary system, even if you win, the opposing parties can form a coalition against you and freeze you out, which looks like what's going on. But still, it was a shock upset election. The system had massive asymmetrical advantages. And Imran Khan, being, a hugely popular leader, had the support of the people, which ultimately prevailed, at least numerically, in that election. So it was a very interesting case, a very interesting story. And actually, he got along great with President Trump when he was in office. And that was probably part of why the deep state hated him so much.
Yeah, because they couldn't start another war between India and Pakistan because you had good relations on both sides. So what was, Darren, what was your, you had to have watched it because it was fairly striking to me, but I'm sure you saw the Fani Willis testimony last week in Fulton County, Georgia. She's the district attorney of one of America's largest cities, and yet seemed to really struggle on the stand. I mean, she came off sort of, aggressive, thug-like, talking about G's and Grey Goose. I mean, how does this person? She got into Emory law apparently, so I'm sure that was legit. But talk about it. I mean, how does this person get into law school, let alone become the district attorney in one of the largest, by population counties anywhere in America?
Well, I think the DEI regime probably accounts for just a little bit of her career success and career trajectory.
And when you say little, you mean like 99.9%.
Right, maybe just a little bit.
Just so we're clear on what little means. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a remarkable display on her part as to, the nature of what things have become in our justice system. I think, once we see more of these Fanny types, we're going to be, begging for the days of Robert Mueller. And I never thought I would say that, but we have these people, and they're so. I mean, Mueller didn't even recommend criminal prosecution to his credit. Like, he's fully corrupt and everything, but I think we're seeing a different level of incompetence plus corruption with people like Fanny, and people fully don't realize it. And I think the public testimony has given people a glimpse who hadn't been exposed to. This is what happens. It ultimately comes down to people, and you have really corrupt and really stupid people in positions of a lot of power. And ultimately it's it's this open question: can we maintain something resembling a first world system where people like this can be in charge of things? Can we really have technology and a handful of pockets of competence do all the heavy lifting? Like in India, the very smartest, the very top people are at the very top level globally, and they count on them to sustain the whole country. So at the highest level, India is doing well, but in the aggregate, it's third world. And so are we okay with our country becoming like that? So it raises a lot of very troubling questions. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, because I mean, in the meantime, in Democrat city after Democrat city, we see more crime, more chaos, no rule of law. I mean, they'll spend countless dollars on, their vacations and spending, government money going after their political enemies like Trump, and then they'll utilize that to go on vacation, and they'll forget all about these magical, she paid back everything in cash because that's what normal people who aren't totally corrupt do, or something, we're told. But I mean, even in Kansas City, there was a shooting at the Super Bowl parade, and we still don't know any of the real information. They're refusing to name names. They don't want to identify the shooters, which tells me only one thing, which is that they weren't, like Republican white males. But what's going on that kind of stuff can sort of not just happen, but just disappear from the conversation so quickly and magically?
Well, I think they were reported to be juveniles.
Yeah, but you know what? Kyle Rittenhouse was a juvenile too.
No. Yeah,
and that didn't stop him from being a white supremacist, mass murdering, roving lunatic, doxxed by the press and by Democrats, a jury that was stalked by the same people. The actual fact, he shot a pedophile and other, pieces of shit, that totally neglected from the conversation. It didn't stop the Democrats from doing that. So, maybe they're minors, but, we seem to have a very different standard for minors that,
There's a difference, though, Don. There's a difference between minor and juvenile. Minors refers to the age. Juvenile has, in the vernacular of the media, become a kind of euphemism, such that when they use the specific word juvenile, I think we all know what that means.
Mm-hmm. Well, perhaps because it's shocking to me that you can have a celebration like this in a city and honestly, people aren't even intellectually curious. They're just like, you're right. It's not on the first page of Google, therefore it didn't happen. I'm like, wait a minute, right. Like we've seen video.
They used to use the term youths, but I think now they've come to use the term juvenile, but it means the same thing. And I think they've released pictures, and it basically confirms our priors, as it were. So yeah, but the longer they cover it up, the more likely it is that it's exactly what you'd expect, basically.
Yeah, that's usually the case. The problem is, that cover, that works fine for you and I to figure it out because we're sitting there doing this stuff all day. Maybe the people that are watching right now, it's why I ask them to like, share, subscribe so other people can hear about this stuff, but you won't see it on CNN. And, a vast majority of the population that isn't as, assertive in trying to figure out what's going on or, perhaps, as awakened, are never going to know that anything even happened. So that's a little bit terrifying. And perhaps the last thing I'd ask you about, what's even more terrifying, if Joe Biden was actually running the country, Darren, or if Joe Biden is just 100% being controlled by the deep state, which is worse between those things at this point? I mean, if it's Joe Biden being sort of, an inept individual that's in charge, or that he's just a 100% puppet controlled by unelected powers, which is worse at this point? Because it's one of the two. No one actually believes. It's got to be one of the two. Which is worse, in your opinion?
Well, worse, I would say, given the state of Biden's mind, it would be worse if Biden were actually in charge. As much as I would say the deep state is bad, is to have someone who clearly just can't understand the basics of language or the basics of reality and his surroundings.
Yeah.
The deep state is at least greedy enough to want to maintain some of the spoils for themselves, and so they're not. There's at least an element there of maybe.
I'd argue the Bidens have gotten quite a few spoils, Darren. It seems like this is by level of IQ. Definitely some of the most overachieving people as public servants with low IQ and crack habits. Given what they've made with what they were working with, man, I don't know as an American whether to be upset or impressed, because either way, they've definitely outkicked their coverage.
Absolutely. So yes, I think Biden is clearly a figurehead, and in some ways we're moving more and more toward this kind of royal version of the presidency in the modern royal sense, in which royal figures are mere figureheads and everyone understands them to be such. That's effectively what Biden is he's King Charles, but even more ridiculous, if such a thing could be imagined. And I think another question, though, is can the Democrats get rid of him in time? And that also remains to be seen. But I'm increasingly of the view that for a variety of reasons behind the scenes, they're stuck with Biden, and this is going to be a big disaster for them in 2024.
Unpopular opinion, probably, but I think they're actually okay with him. If they can do enough of their lawfare, if they can do enough of their cheating, if they can play enough games and sort of overcome the margin of fraud or win because of the margin of fraud, I think they're okay with it, because they have the puppet that you're talking about that will sign whatever ridiculous thing the left wants. The things that Obama would have probably loved to have implemented, but would not be willing to sacrifice sort of his reputation with the American people, his overall popularity, etc. With Joe Biden as sort of just, with a stroke of a pen, yeah, sure, Joe will sign that, stick it in front of him. Who cares? I mean, the legislation is radical. Obama wouldn't have allowed the border crisis to be this bad. I believe he'd love it to be so if he could get away with not taking the responsibility for it. But that's just not the case. Whereas I feel like they're very happy to throw Joe Biden under the bus as long as they're getting what they want. And in that sense, he's been very effective for the radical left, because he's not worried about a legacy. He's got no legacy. He's an imbecile. He has no idea what's going on.
Right. Yeah, I think there are definitely factions that want him out and that think that he's gone too far. He's too ridiculous. He's not sellable. But again, that's a big coordination problem behind the scenes. And, there are various hurdles to that, from Joe Biden wanting to cling to the presidency because of the possibility of legal trouble for him and his family. He wants the pardon power as long as he can have it. The heir apparent, the traditional heir, Kamala Harris, whom we've discussed, nobody wants her, including the Dem establishment.
She's a Joe Biden lifesaver, without question. Yeah. I mean, without her there, if they had a reasonably competent VP, I mean, I think it's a whole different scenario. But they realize that she's perhaps even more unelectable than Joe Biden, which is literally hard to believe, but very true.
And yet to leapfrog her is a vexed issue because of the Dem constituency. So they're in a really difficult bind here. And there might be some ingenious solutions. We saw the power and the efficacy of the Democrat machine in the 2020 primary. Remember when there were all these people like Buttigieg, everyone, then all of a sudden, seemingly overnight, it all locked in for Biden? Like that was an impressive flex by the Democrat machine, assuming they still have a little bit of that juice, but this might even be too much for that machine. And even the machine would have to settle on somebody, and it's not clear who that person would be. So ultimately, I think we're going to see Biden stick it out, and as shocking and as ridiculous as that might seem.
Well, we will see. But, Darren, it's great to have you guys. Make sure to check out Revolver News and everything that Darren is doing over there. He's really actually doing the work that other journalists are supposed to be doing but refusing to. So, always appreciate you having you on, Darren. Thanks so much for being here, and we look forward to, as we get more breaks in some of these major stories that, again, others refuse to cover, look forward to having you back. So thank you so much for being here. Guys, thank you so much for joining us. Again, make sure to follow Darren, Revolver News, all of the things that he's doing. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. I see how many people are watching. I see the number of likes. They are not commensurate just yet. Get that number going. That's how we beat the algorithm that we're talking about. Also, remember that you can get Triggered on Spotify and iTunes podcasts. Download it there. If you have friends that get their podcast that way, send it to them so that they can get the same news. We can get it out there. It's because of you guys that we're able to do this, but I need your help. Okay, I need your help getting it out there. So please do whatever you can with that. Also, I'm going to be doing locals right after this. I may let my team go because we went a little bit long. I may go downstairs, just do it from my phone, have a cigar. So I'll join locals 5 minutes after we sign off on here. And also, guys, don't forget to go check out our incredible sponsors. Go to twc.health/triggered for a 15% discount on their emergency medical kit. That's like twc.health, like the wellness company, .health/triggered, 15% off the emergency medical kit so you can take care of your family's health in an emergency, in a public health crisis, et cetera, et cetera. Also, get a free 30-day supply on all bundles and an extra 15% off your ordering by going to getsuperbeats.com and using promo code TRIGGERED. Okay, we talked about Get Super Beats, what they're doing for your cardiovascular system, all of the help there, taking care of your health, promoting good blood pressure, etc. So that's GetSuperBeats, BEETS.com, code TRIGGERED to get a discount on that so you can take care of your health. That's just your standard cardiovascular health. You got the wellness company to deal with the public health crises and other things you got to deal with, but be self-sufficient. Check it out there. Locals, I'll see you guys there in a few minutes. I may go grab a quick cigar. Check it out. If you're a member there, I'll go do my Ask Me Anything there. And guys, thanks as always for tuning in. But before you leave, like, share, subscribe, download the Rumble app because I'm not on every day. It's not as easy to get sort of in the rhythm of following the show, and share it however your friends, your families get their podcasts. If they get them on Spotify, send them the link. Do it yourselves. We got to take the initiative to do all of that because God knows big tech is not going to do it for us, guys. So thanks so much. You guys are the best. Look forward to seeing you soon, and I will see you on Thursday. Be good.